Good morning, Journey Church. This is Pastor Chad. Hope you're having a great day in this Lord on this Sabbath day, spending time with your family, spending time in the Word, whatever it may be for you. I just hope God is showing His blessings upon you. As we've been going through this past week, I have just been praying for the joy of the Lord to be in every single one of us this week, that the joy of the Lord would be your strength. So hey, today we are continuing part 5 of our series, Trusting God. And I want to start off this morning by asking a question. How many of you have ever had that day in your life where it changed everything? It was a game changer. You know, there's 3 of them I can specifically think of in my life, and one of them was the day that my wife and I met, that we were married. That day obviously changed my life and the trajectory of my life. Another day is when I clearly felt the calling of God in my life to full-time ministry. You know, Pastor Ben, you've heard me tell this story many times when he came over to my house and said, Chad, I know you have a calling on your life. You know you have a calling in your life. If you do not do what God's calling you to do and fulfill that calling, I believe you'll never do it. And from that day forward, it set me into a life of ministry. I remember the day in Holland, Michigan, when the doctor looked at us, me and my wife, and the baby girl was born, and she said, "It's a Quinn." And from that day forward, my life was completely different. So let me ask you, what day changed your life? Now, these aren't always days that are filled with upside. Sometimes they're downsided. There's the day that you open the letter that you haven't been accepted into the college that you had your heart set on attending all these years. Maybe it's the day that comes and you think the adoption is going to happen today, only for it to fall through. So have you ever had a day that changed your life, whether it be positive or in a negative way? And so today we're going to look at a character in the Bible by the name of David. We would know him as King David. And when we drop in to his storyline today, he is not king yet. We will look, though, at a day that changed David's life, and it had to do with an errand, and it had to do with a song. The errand was to go find his brothers who had gone to battle and take them food and find out how they were doing and come back and report how they were doing to his father, whose name was Jesse. Now, the spot that we're going to be looking at today, the Philistines approached on the Israelite territory. The Philistines were not just a group of riders that swooped in and took the sheep and the goats and the gold and weapons and then just went back home. This was an attack where the Philistines intended on taking the Israelites' territory. So King Saul is the king of Israel at the time, and he rallies all the clans of Israel to go and fend off this Philistine threat. And it kind of ends up being a standoff between the Philistines and the Israelites on one side and the other side of a valley. And neither of them are attacking or defending. And then there is this monster, this giant of a man named Goliath. And he is encased in bronze armor. He goes into the valley and challenges any one of the Israelites to a one-on-one battle. It's kind of like a winner takes all kind of a deal. And the Israelites were just paralyzed by this guy. Now, this is when David arrives. Now, David is not a warrior. David is there on just simply an errand. He's there to bring his brothers food. David is like, hey, why isn't anyone fighting this guy? And King Saul hears that David wants to fight this guy and allows him to go into the valley and face him. And if you've been around the Bible any length of a time, or even whether you've been in church any length of time, you have probably heard this story. And we hear it in sports all the time. David killed the Goliath, right? It's a boy versus Goliath kind of a situation. He goes down to a stream and he selects 5 smooth rocks, stones, and he has a sling. Now the stone that you would sling back then was about the size of an egg, all the way up to the size of a tennis ball. And in Palestine, they still use these slings today to fend off animals, even sometimes in war. And I have read that if you are very proficient with the sling, you can sling a stone up to 400 yards. My friends, that's a quarter of a mile. How many of you know that's a long way? So David goes out and takes his sling, and again, he's a proficient slinger, and can hit a target from a very reasonable distance. And from what we understand, the helmet that Goliath was probably wearing, he had an opening to hit him about the size of a deck of cards. And the rock flies and it hits the Goliath's skull, crushing his skull, going into his brain cavity, and the guy drops, and the Philistines, seeing this, begin to flee. And so when David kills the Philistine, the people are ecstatic, and he turns into this hero. He turns into this folk hero. He turns into a military hero overnight. So an Aaron changed his life, but a song also changed his life. As King Saul returned victorious from defeating the Philistines, there is this little tune, and it begins to spread. And it says that the women came out of the villages and towns to sing it. It said Saul had slain his thousands, but David had slain his tens of thousands. They are placing shepherd boy David above King Saul. Now, David has not slain tens of thousands of people. I can count. It has been one. It was a slight exaggeration. And Saul, who knew he was on his way out, looks at David and says, it's him. He's the one that's going to try to remove the crown from my head. And so Saul pulls in David close to him, trying to keep his enemy close. David is an incredible musician, and he plays a harp. And there's a time, out of a jealous rage, that Saul tries to throw a sword right at David while he's playing the harp for him in his courtroom. I mean, that seems to be an indication for Saul's hatred for David. But later on, Saul sends David on a suicide mission, thinking that he's going to go into this war and David will not succeed and he will be slain. But David comes back from the suicide mission victorious, and his popularity even skyrockets all the more. And there's this day where the breaking point comes for Saul, and he just tries to outright kill David. And David flees and has to run into the desert. Now, David runs into the Judean wilderness, and I've actually been there, and it is, let me tell you, a nasty place. And that is where David runs and hides. And from what we understand of David as a shepherd, he was a shepherd in those areas, so he knew where the caves were, he knew where the water sources were, and that's where David will spend years of his life hiding from this jealous king. And out of the anxiety and turmoil was forged trust in David, though. There was a language of trust that he learned. But understand that this deal with Saul was not the last of David's deep conflict and anxiety. See, Saul finally is killed in battle, and David becomes king. And when that happens, he has this drama and intrigue in his own palace where his own son, by the name of Absalom, tries to lead a coup against his own dad. So David is surrounded by conflict once again. He is surrounded by drama, and in those times, he's learning to trust God. And what you have is David's songs. They are filled with the language of trust. These songs can help us, I believe, to have a conversation with God when everything seems to be falling apart, when we are filled with anxiety and we don't know what to do. Now, for some of you that are new to the Bible, in the Old Testament, there is 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then there's this is where you would find the narrative of David's life. And then there's another book in the Bible called Psalms. And this is where you would find the songs that David wrote. And you might be stunned to know today that when things were not going very well today, for David, he would say things like, God, things are not going well. When things were not good, David was very comfortable with saying, God, things are not going good. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not comfortable with this. The question is this: how comfortable are you when things are not going well to come to God and say, God, it's not going well. I don't know what to do. I keep on praying and I just feel like my prayers are hitting the roof, that my prayers are falling upon deaf ears. This is the deal this morning. We're going to look at 3 different Psalms of David, and we're going to look at 3 different segments of Psalm 13, 55, and 69. And by looking at these 3 different Psalms, I think you might learn how to pray in a new way that maybe we thought was wrong, that you can't talk that way to God. You can't pray that way to God. And as we look at the way David expressed the language of trust, when trust was hanging on by a thread, I think today might be critical in your journey of learning to be honest with God. So Psalm 13 is a song of waiting. We would read this in verse 1. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? So he asked the question 4 times in 2 verses. How long? How long? I mean, come on, how long? God, how long? It is a cry of someone who is waiting. It is the voice of someone who feels forgotten. David is so comfortable bringing his pain. How long am I supposed to sit here? I just wonder if some of you were to write an honest prayer out to God, what would it sound like? How long will this lawsuit last? How long will this litigation be hanging over my head? How long until this adoption finally comes through? How long until I recover from the surgery? They said it would be 6 weeks, but it's been 4 months and I don't feel any better. How long? And from those 2 verses, you might get the question, my goodness, is that legal? Is it legal to present your trouble and just dump it there? Caution, the language that is used here, there is a technical term for it, and it is called lament. Lament is different than complaining because lament isn't simply using and hurling anxiety towards God and then turning your back and storming out of the conversation. Lament begins the conversation by presenting trouble, but lament stays in the conversation. Pain is not ignored, but in lament, trust gets the final word. In each of these songs, no matter how nasty it is in the beginning, there is the point at the end of the song where David is saying, but I'm still here. I still trust you. Please come through. And this is what happens at the end of the chapter in verse 5. He starts with lament, but this is how he ends. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. In this type of song, pain is not ignored. It is front and center. Pain does not get the final word. Trust gets the final word. Be advised that this is not a drive-by shooting at God. Pain begins the conversation, but it does not end the conversation. Song number 1 has to deal with waiting. Song number 2 is a song of flight. Listen to the words of David in verse 6 of chapter 55. I said, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm." When David writes this song, I have the impression he is no longer in the days of hiding out in caves from King Saul. I think he himself is the king, and he is writing this in the palace. And this is a day where difficulty just seems so strong, and his heart is broken, and he just wishes for flight. If I just had wings of a dove, I could fly away and finally find rest. This language is significant where he says, I would flee really far away and I would stay in the desert. I would hurry to the place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. David says, I just wish I could flee to the desert. And remember, he knows what it's like to live in the desert. Remember, he was hiding from King Saul and was just trying to hide in the caves. I think David felt safer in the desert and in these caves than he does in his own palace. I just want to ask David, what happened? What mess are you in? And he tells us in Psalm 55, verse 12, if an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. But it's you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend. David was like, listen, if it was just an enemy, but it isn't. It was my close friend. And he goes, I don't know how to hold up under this. I wonder how many of you this morning could say it was the abandonment. It was desertion. It was my partner, business partner for 20 years that just left me hanging with the bills. It was my husband who left me. It was you, my wife. It was my child. It was my father who left me, who deserted us. It was you, my closest friend. I told you things I had never told anyone else, and you betrayed me. David goes, if I only had the wings of a dove, I would fly out of here and find a place to hide. But once again, this is not a drive-by. This is not turning his back against God and storming out of the conversation. Listen, remember, lament brings the conversation by starting with pain, but that's not where it ends. Towards the end of the song, David advises the listener in verse 22, cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. Now, David lives about 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, and David uses these words, cast your cares upon God. 1,000 years later, there is a disciple of Jesus by the name of Peter who said this after the death, burial, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. Peter would say, casting all your care upon him, for he cares about you. Bring all of your anxiety to God because he cares. So the second song is about flight, and the third song is about drowning. Though this language is so powerful in Psalm 69, verse 1. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the miry depths where there is no foothold. I have come into the deep waters. The floods engulf me. I can't think of a better image to demonstrate panic than the feeling of someone drowning. I know that when I was in Mexico on vacation, There was a time where I felt like I was drowning. I could not get my breath, and it lasted about 45 seconds where these waves kept on crashing me and the waves kept on rolling me underwater. And I even remember thinking to myself, this is going to be hard on my wife and my kids because I'm going to drown and I'm not going to see them again. But God miraculously saved me, and I'll tell you that story some other time. But in that moment, there was true panic that I had never felt in my life before. The language of drowning is so powerful that we use it metaphorically all the time. We say things like, we're drowning in debt, right? We talk about just waves of grief. We talk about situations that just pull us under. We talk about being engulfed in tragedy. And David is like, the water is up to my neck, and it just seems to be rising. My voice is hoarse from calling out for help. This is the language David used with God to describe the situation. He felt like he was a drowning man. In the Psalms of Lament, in the songs of desperate cries, pain is not ignored, get this, but pain does not get the final word. Trust gets the final word. Listen to David as he gets these final words in verse 14 through 15 in Psalm 69. Rescue me from the mire. Do not let me sink. Deliver me from those who hate me, from the deep waters. Do not let the flood waters engulf me, or the depths swallow me up, or the pit close its mouth over me. I love these songs because they are so honest with life. They are so honest to God. I also love them because they are so hopeful. So what are you feeling overwhelmed with today? You know, there was a king in the Bible by the name of Hezekiah who lived sometime after King David. And there was this Syrian army of the north that was just going through and devouring country after country that got in their way. And this army was on their way to Jerusalem, and their king sends this letter to Hezekiah, and the letter to Hezekiah basically says, I'm going to destroy you like I have everyone else unless you surrender now. Talk about putting fear in. You know they haven't been stopped before. And so what do you do as a king? So for Hezekiah, there had to be this extreme amount of fear and anxiety. Nothing in his background has prepared him to deal with something like this. The beauty of the story is that King Hezekiah left his court and he took the letter to the temple of the Lord and he just filled it out. And he takes this letter and he spread out the letter to the Lord. He spread it out before the Lord. And it was just this humble moment of him writing down his fears and his worries and his anxiety, just saying, I don't know what to do with this, Lord. I don't know how to lead with this. He invites Creator God into his situation and trusts him. There have been many times where I've just simply taken a 3x5 index card, and just in those times, in those seasons of my life where I don't know what to do, where I'm overwhelmed, I will simply lay them on the ground, write on them, God, here are my anxieties, here are my fears, here are my worries, and say, God, I don't know what to do with this, but I trust you with these fears, with these anxieties. So here's my question for you this morning. If you had to fill out a 3x5 card this morning, what would be on them for you? When David said, cast your care upon the Lord, what would that care be for you? For some of you, it may just be the consuming grief that clings to you like a long winter and that it will not go away. And it's the time, to have a conversation with God, like David was able to do and lament with God. He was able to cast his cares upon God. But his cares did not get the final word. I love that. God got the final word. For some of you, you will write on your card worries about future decisions. It's time to cast those future decisions, those cares, those worries, those anxieties upon God and let God have the final word. For others, it may be a failure or a mistake that you've hung on to for too long, and you want to be set free of those chains of your past. Cast them upon God today and just lay them before him and say, God, I don't know what to do with these. I've tried to deal with these for too long, and so today I give them to you. For others, it might be the child who you feel is far from the Lord, or you simply don't know how to parent. It's time for you to cast your fear, cast your worries upon God and let him have the final word. For some of us, it may be a political issue. It may be a fear of health issue. No matter what it is, I would encourage you to take a 3x5 card and just cast them down onto those cards and give them to God and say, God, these are yours. So that's my homework assignment for you. You take a legal pad, a 3x5 card, whatever works for you. But can I plead with you to write these down within the next 24 hours so that it does not get piled in the land of good intentions. Many times we hear about this and we go, sometime this week I'll do that. And unfortunately, that's all they are good intentions. Write them down in the next 24 hours, and I plead with you to go and cast all your fears, all your worries upon God. Just find a quiet space and go in front of God and say, okay, God, here we go. I don't know what to do with these. I feel like I'm drowning. Just lay these things down and don't storm away and turn your back. Just remain there, because just remain present with God, because the conversation begins, but this is not the end of the conversation. So just don't lay him down and walk away. Just spend some time with God and just bathe him in prayer. And I promise you, like King David, God will show himself faithful. It may not be in the way you want, in the timing you want, but yet nonetheless, God will be faithful to provide for you. Hey church, I love you. Let's just pray real quick. If that's you here this morning and you've been writing these down, or they're just in your mind, let me just pray with you. Heavenly Father, today, so many of us may be hearing this, and for the first time, we're willing to say, God, I've tried this on my own. I've tried to lay down this pain for so long in my life, but no longer do I try to do it on my own, but I cast these cares upon you. I cast this debt upon you. I cast this fear upon you. I cast this health problem upon you. I cast this relationship problem upon you. And God, I know that in the end, I can trust you. And so we lay these before you. And God, would you do a supernatural touch right now and give people the peace and wisdom to fill these cards out and begin to show up in their lives and in ways that they have not seen in a long time or have ever seen before, so that God, we know that you are trustworthy, that we can cast all our fears, all our anxieties upon you, because you're a good Father who loves us, who sees us, who cares for us. So God, we're thankful for all that you're going to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, church, if that's you this week and you filled one of these out and you just begin to see God show up in a miraculous way, send us a text, send us a email saying, hey, I just want to give you a testimony of what God has done. If you have a prayer request that we can be praying with you on, please send that in to us as well. Hey, church, just want to remind you that this coming Thursday, we're going to continue our Zoom small group meeting. The link will be below. We do that every Thursday at 7 o'clock. And we are going to just spend some time in prayer. We're going to spend some time talking about today's message and just going through and maybe even hearing testimonies of how and what God has done in your life. So, hey, remember, God loves you. He sees you. He cares for you. Can't wait to see you again next week. Love you, church. Bye-bye.